Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our program, to our another session of Silver Linings, Finding Hope Through Faith. And today we have actually one of our board members who was also one of our first, well, she was our first board member from the SCIC Buddhist community who's joining us today, who will speak to us a little bit about her faith and the role of her faith in finding hope during this time. Just like we always say in the beginning, the reason we have this program is because we wanted to highlight how various communities are dealing with this pandemic right now and finding the hope that's there, or finding the silver lining. Silver lining is oftentimes identified or defined as something that's inspirational, something that's hopeful amidst, something that's gloomy. And so that was really the idea behind this program, is for us to shine light on that hope aspect and learn from one another. So I want to help me please welcome Patti Heckman from the SCIC Buddhist community. Hi, Patti. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Milia. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of Silver Linings.
Of course, it's always a joy to have you. And like I said, you hold many special positions in the SCIC, and you were the first Buddhist president of the organization. When was that? That was about, goodness, 6 years ago.
Yeah, I believe it was 2013, 2014 maybe.
Time flies by, my goodness. So as I was telling you, and you've seen this program before as well, we really just kind of want to have a casual conversation about your faith, what it means to you, how it's helping you during this time, and really what we as an interfaith community can learn from the principles of your faith or your worldview. So to begin with, Patti, I wanted to ask if you would share a little bit about yourself so that our viewers can get to know you a little bit more.
Oh, sure. So I grew up in Denver, Colorado. I went to school at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And somewhere in my graduate student studies, I became introduced to Nichiren Buddhism, which is the SCI organization is based on Nichiren Buddhism. And at the time, that my friend first introduced me to it and invited me to a local meeting, which is just basically a gathering of people in the neighborhood that are members of the SGI. They come together and, chant together and study together, etc. I dismissed it because I thought it was just another new age thing that Boulder people do, and I was too busy as a college student to get involved with, kind of frivolous nonsense. And then a couple of years later after that, and my friend who introduced me had moved away, so I hadn't seen her for like 2 years. And lo and behold, that 2 years later, she shows up in the library at the school on the university campus, and I was sitting there, and I must have looked horrible to her because at that time I was suffering from anorexia, as a lot of young women have that condition, and it's brought on by stress, it's brought on by insecurity, a sense of powerlessness, etc. So I had actually developed anorexia as a graduate student, and so I was like actually failing out of the school of linguistics. I had taken part 1 of my comprehensive exams for my master's degree, and my professor said, "Oh, you're kind of like borderline pass fail," which I was in a tailspin downward and really didn't know how to get out. And then mystically, my friend comes back into my life, and she said, hearing this, she said, "Patti, you have to chant. You have to chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo." And I said, okay, I thought, what have I got to lose at this point? Plus, it really helped that she lived right across the street from the library. So we just, hopped out of the library, went into her living room where she has her altar and the object of devotion, which is called the Gohonzon, which we all chant to. It was all there, in her home. So immediately I was chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, and it's as if all of this, kind of relief was happening. The stuff that was held up in my life from the stress and from the insecurity, it was kind of coming out, and I was in tears and all this stuff. And so then I thought, wow, this is really kind of powerful. I don't know if it can really help me, pass my comprehensive exams, but I'm going to try this. So I did try it, and I gained confidence like right away. Like I went into my professor's office and I said, I want to take the next test, the next comprehensive exam, because I wanted to get on with my life. For the first time in, I don't know how many months, I actually had that confidence to say, I can step forward regardless of this anorexia, and I can claim my dream to graduate from this school and get on with my life. So my professor said, well, we don't recommend it. And I said, blah, blah, blah. And they said, okay, well then be here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And I thought, oh my gosh, what did I do? But you know what? I showed up and I passed that test, just barely. I passed it. They had me write a paper, which was great because I love writing papers. I don't like, trying to do tests. And I got my degree. And then I got my dream job teaching English overseas in Japan. I mean, it happened that fast. And so I still had the anorexia, but I was able to function. And then 8 months later, I did not have the anorexia because I was working on using my faith to overcome my insecurities and my sense of powerlessness, etc. And so then one day it kind of broke. And I could feel that I did not want to be living that life anymore. I wanted to come out of that shell. Mm-hmm. So that was like the beginning of my Buddhist practice. And, that was so many years ago, I'm not going to mention how many years ago it was. I have never been in a deadlock ever using this faith. Many things have happened, and including divorce, and including financial hardship, including being fired from a job, all of those things. But I have never been deadlocked, and I truly owe a debt of gratitude, to the people that raised me in this faith.
Oh, wow. That's such an amazing story. I knew parts of it, but parts of it I didn't know, even, knowing you for so many years, right? So yeah. You mentioned some things before we kind of address this notion, or this, the circumstance that we're in terms of the pandemic. I know you said, this is Nichiren Buddhism. I heard things like chanting, right? And so tell us a little bit about the faith. How is, the Soka International Buddhism versus kind of your, there's various types of Buddhism in this world, and you actually are the ones that kind of opened my eyes to that. And so I want to ask you to tell me a little bit about the specific Buddhism that you practice and what it entails, and where it started, and a little bit about the faith in itself.
Sure. Well, the Soka Gakkai is a fairly new organization. It was established in 1930. But the Buddhism that we practice is centuries old. It goes back to Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived about 2,500 years ago, in India. And he expounded many teachings. His highest teaching that we recognize is the Lotus Sutra. And mm-hmm. probably many people have at least heard of it, if not read excerpts from it. So the Lotus Sutra is the sutra that is like the Buddhism of humanity, the Buddhism of hope, that says everybody is equal, everybody is interconnected. You can gain access to your own Buddhahood because it's in your life. The provisional teachings before that were taught by the Buddha did not recognize the capacity of, for example, women could not become enlightened, animals could not become, enlightened. There was like this transmigration that had to happen before, certain things could be open to you. But the Lotus Sutra says, no, you can become enlightened at this time, just the way you are, and in this lifetime. So that was the teaching of the Buddha, and that's the philosophy. But it took Nichiren Daishonin, who lived in Japan. He was a 13th century monk living in Japan. And he was the one that revealed the highest teaching of the Lotus Sutra, which he took the title, Myoho Renge Kyo. And you add the honorific title Nam to the beginning of that, and you have the chant. This is the basic Buddhist prayer that we all do every morning and every evening, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And loosely translated, that means devotion to the mystic law of cause and effect through sound and action. So when we chant, we're invoking the mystic law, and we're tapping the innate Buddhahood in our life. And that is to gain the kind of life condition that the Buddha had. And the kind of life condition that the Buddha had was this, supreme, sublime life condition of happiness and joy, where he was not bothered, by the devastation around him, by the sufferings of the people. Definitely he was responding to the sufferings of the people, but he was not defeated by what was going on around him. And in other words, he overcame his own circumstances, and he overcame, his own sufferings, and he awakened to the truth, and the truth being that we all have this capacity in our lives to gain that life condition and to go on and live happy lives despite any circumstances. So he revealed Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, and he declared it in Japan at a time very much like this time, where there was a lot of suffering going on. And Nichiren Daishonin was quite an unusual person. At the age of 12, he started studying in the temples where they kept all of the scriptures. So he, at the age of 12, out of trying to repay his debt of gratitude to his parents for the gift of life, he wanted to make his life worth something. So he wanted to solve like the sufferings of the country. And he started studying. And at the age of 32, he declared Nam-myoho Renge Kyo as the essential teaching that would solve the sufferings of the people. And for that, he was persecuted heavily because, that went against other teachings that were in place, and definitely it disrupted the power structure, that the ruler is the one who tells the people what the spirituality of the land should be, not, a monk coming up with this new idea. So he was very revolutionary and very radical, but they could not turn their backs on the fact that Japan was suffering. The people were suffering. They were suffering very much like we are now. They had pestilence. They had, disasters of a natural source, like high winds and floods. They actually had warfare, foreign invasion and civil strife. All of that was going on, and people were like lying dead in the streets. I mean, that was the type of condition that Japan was at the time. And no one had the solution, and everyone was kind of like locked in this fear and this agony. And along comes Nichiren Daishonin and said, I have the solution, And it was really because the Lotus Sutra and this Nam-myoho Renge Kyo says the sanctity of life is the most important thing. The Lotus Sutra is based on the dignity of life for all beings, regardless of color, regardless of creed, regardless of beliefs, all kinds of things. That's it. That's the most important thing. And that is not being practiced in this land at this time. That is why you're seeing these calamities, and that is why you're seeing these disasters. So that was Nichiren Daishonen's life, and he led a life of persecution. He was exiled. He was almost beheaded, but he gained, a following. His disciples followed him, and so that Buddhism woke up people's lives, and it was carried forth and through his disciples. But then there was a time period where it was not spread, and it kind of died. However, the three presidents of this organization, the Soka Gakkai organization, picked up Nichiren Buddhism and brought it back to life. And in 1930, as I said, the Soka Gakkai organization was founded, and it was founded by Sunasuguro Makaguchi and his, I guess you could say, disciple, Josei Toda. And they were teachers. They were teachers in Japan, and they recognized like an environment of, militarism was going on at that time, because it was around the time of World War II. And, in the schools, they were forced to teach by certain methods that would glorify war and depict, young men in airplanes dropping bombs and all kinds of things like that. And they said, no, we don't want to teach like this. This is not right, and they brought up the causes, and they went into action for the sake of the students. And they lost their jobs, but anyway, they started the Soka Gakkai to, for like the it's a revolutionary type of move to get all people the education that they deserve. And then they came across the philosophy of Nichiren Buddhism at that point, and they said, oh, this fits our movement. Our movement is for the sake of the people, and that, everyone, the respect for everyone, and that the government should not be, using for their own greedy purposes or their own interests. They should not be using young men's lives, to go to war. So this falls in line with Nichiren Buddhism. Mm-hmm. So they actually became like, disciples of Nichiren Daishonin, and went on to recreate in this modern age this Buddhism and the practice of this Buddhism.
Okay.
So that's how we come up to the mission of the Soka Gakkai too, which is to really like spread peace throughout the land. So widely declare the teachings of Nichiren Buddhism, which is again the sanctity of life and respect for everyone, for the sake to develop ourselves as that kind of person that can lead a happy life, but can also give happiness to others. That kind of person that can make a difference, like Nichiren Daishonin made a difference, or like our mentors made a difference in their society, for the sake of the people. So when the pandemic hit, we Buddhists went into action. We've been praying a lot, not just, the regular morning and evening prayers, but we have a campaign going on, which consists of three things. Abundant Daimoku, it's an ABC campaign. So A is abundant Daimoku. Daimoku is chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. B is for Buddhist study. To really find out, delve into the philosophy and the teachings of this Buddhism, to really understand this time period and to understand the impact it has on us and other people, and how we can, really take this opportunity to move beyond the pandemic, for a better future. And then C, part of the campaign is to connect with others. And we've been doing that. That's definitely part of our Buddhist practice, is to connect with one another and to spread this Buddhism, to help one another, etc. But this connection is more than that, because we found out, people are really experiencing all kinds of emotions now. It's not unusual that people would be anxious or experience fear and depression, etc. But it's very unusual that people would be experiencing all of those emotions at once, and that's what's happening now.
Yeah.
So this is a very, very important time to connect with others, and not just among ourselves, but to reach out to neighbors, to reach out to our friends and family who maybe we haven't heard from for a while and we haven't connected with for a while, to really say, how are you? How are you? And find out what do they really need, and dig down in our lives to encourage them and to remain hopeful, and to give them just a glimmer of a breakthrough. If they lost their job, for example, or, oh my gosh, my roommate got COVID-19, now what do I do? And am I doomed, and my teacher is asking me for, where's this essay that's due, etc. But all I can think of is, I might have the COVID-19, so all of those things are going on for many people right now.
So there's two things I wanted to kind of touch back on that you said in terms of your practice of Nichiren Buddhism. The chanting, you said on a typical day, if you're not in a pandemic, it's crazy, right? But usually you said you chant twice a day. Yes. And then now obviously there's these campaigns to chant more, and because as a means of helping one another and the community as well, during this time, during this pandemic that we're facing. So two questions I had for that, Patti, is, on a normal basis, the chanting, is it at a specific time that you do during the day, or is it at any time? So that's my first question, and then I'll continue with the second after you answer that.
Well, we try to chant every morning and every evening. Okay. And it does involve Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. It also involves part of the Lotus Sutra, excerpts from the Lotus Sutra, reciting those. So, of course, we all lead busy lives, and we're not at home all the time. We are now, but of course, usually we're rushing around doing this and that. So sometimes, you don't do your morning prayers until the afternoon. Sometimes you find yourself at lunchtime sneaking away into a private area, or even going into your car and doing the prayer, things like that. So yeah, it's every morning and every evening.
So then in terms of, I know that, okay, there's multiple questions here. So I know my experience with Nichiren Buddhism and with you and the encounter with Buddhism via you. In the past, I know that in terms of like an actual center, you guys had one that was more located kind of in the South Bay, and now recently you have one that's actually in Long Beach, which is, kind of one of the main areas that we serve. And my question to you is that I know that in the past, when I've been to your centers and I've participated in the chanting, I wanted to ask, before the pandemic hit, I know the center is used for various activities and gatherings and meetings and things like that. But was it also, were there designated times where there was chanting that was happening at the center? And, obviously, is that something that's being lost now? Because I suspect your center is probably closed, just like churches and mosques and things like that.
Right. Our center closed early, actually. I think the second week of March, our centers closed around the country. And also we were, staying home and not visiting each other in their home, which is, kind of common, because we do hold gatherings, we call them meetings, not only in our centers, but also in the neighborhood district home. And these are, members' homes that they open up for smaller meetings, et cetera, on a regular basis. So to answer your question, you know, nothing is being lost in terms of prayer. We have our own gohanzen, the object of devotion, in our homes. It is, you know, enshrined in an altar. And so every morning and evening, we can be at home and pray there. We do not have to go to the center or attend a meeting to pray. Of course, you know, when we start meetings, we always start them with a prayer. So what we're missing really is just praying together. You know, you can do that to some extent, but what we do is we set a designated time, and so then everybody's doing it in their own home, you know, but we're doing it together because we're doing it at the same time and as a select unit. And then maybe at the end, we might get on Zoom and say hello to each other and then read a couple passages to study and things like that. So that's a way to, you know, kind of stay together. We are missing, we have a monthly meeting called Kosen Rupa Gongyo, which is World Peace Gongyo. And that is a prayer that we do, you know, for world peace every month collectively in our centers around the country. And we are missing that because we can't really do that on Zoom. That during that time, we show a video of our mentor, our current mentor, Daisaku Ikeda, and you know, his speeches, or the president of the Soka Gakkai's speeches, you know, etc., on that video. So we cannot, you know, do that outside of the centers. And also we can welcome guests, and that is being done, and guests are showing up at the Zoom meetings, which is wonderful. And, you know, because we do like to spread this Buddhism, and that's just one of the things that we can share. And we can share at this time. We're finding out very creative ways to do that. And the youth division are very busy with Instagram and, you know, Facebook and other social media platforms. I shouldn't say just the youth division. Oh my gosh. I mean, the rest of us too. I sound so old. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so we, you know, we could definitely share with others, and we are doing that, and guests are showing up at our meetings over Zoom and becoming interested in chanting themselves. They cannot, you know, actually join with the receiving the object of devotion at this time, because that can only be done in, you know, in person. That can only be conferred in person. But other than that, they can do anything, any part of the practice together with us.
That's okay. So, you know, one of the questions that I always like to ask my friends that I'm interviewing, in terms of this pandemic, kind of on a personal level, you know, what is something that has really kind of struck you? You know, for example, earlier this week, we had, I did a program with one of our former board members, if you remember, Deborah Sanchez from the American community. And it was one of the things that, you know, she was talking about is one of the things that really struck her about the pandemic and the ramifications of the pandemic is how, you know, it's affecting us as human beings in regards to, you know, we're at home, we're not out and about, we're not in the, you know, in the world per se, and as such, the world is kind of going back to its homeostasis, right? You know, the air is clean, the you know, all these things in nature are kind of getting back to balance, because as human beings, we're not polluting, we're not out in our cars, and we're not doing this and doing that. And for her, that was something really significant, because obviously, you know, there's such a significant tie to the earth and their faith tradition, you know, the Native American spirituality. So I wonder, you know, of coming from your Nichiren Buddhism perspective and looking at kind of what's happening in this pandemic, the ramifications of it, what's something that really kind of strikes you, you know, as a practicing Buddhist?
Well, I have to say, for my own, you know, personal practice, I'll begin with that. I thought that meetings were important. You know, I was one that always got uplifted, inspired totally encouraged by meetings. I loved going to the center and seeing the flower arrangement that was made, handmade by a member. I love seeing the children laugh and giggle, and and then finding out the latest things going on with the members that have gathered there. And then just the community, all being together in one room and chanting together and coming up with these wonderful ideas. What are we going to do for this next meeting to make it really impactful for the members, and discussing together, exchanging these wonderful ideas, holding these dialogues. But I soon discovered, to my amazement, that I didn't need all of that to do my practice, and not only to do my practice, but to have a breakthrough in my practice, because I had the time to chant more. I did chant more, and I discovered things in my life as a practitioner of this Buddhism that I hadn't discovered before. In other words, who was I as a fighter? Who was I as someone who could be a disciple of Daisaku Ikeda, our current mentor and president? And to be, a true disciple, it is, do you follow the mentor's spirit? Do you have the same desire and spirit as the mentor to fight through the ills of society to gain world peace? Would you selflessly do that? And I was able to see the suffering of the people so much more. The anxiety in their faces, just even going to the grocery store, you see that. And then, oh my gosh, the explosion of division again online, and the hate speech that comes out, and and people really fearful and retreating into their own kind of narrow existences, that they feel safe in. And I understand that, rather than, kind of coming together collectively. It's more like we tend to retreat. So I thought, gosh, this is not the society I want to live in. And what did Nichiren Daishonin do? And he actually came up with 3 poisons that we all, as human beings, we succumb to from time to time, and we're definitely subjected to. And those 3 poisons are greed, anger, and foolishness. And he said, if we base our lives on those, then we're bound to have these kinds of crisis situations, where life is out of balance, and the true humanity of people is not coming out, it's not being shown. And it's kind of like this vicious cycle. Once the greed comes out, then that creates more stress and more division and crisis situations. And as Buddhists, we believe in the oneness of self and the environment. So whatever we have in our life is going to be exhibited in our environment in some way or another. Even if it is these disasters that we think, well, they didn't come from us. Well, Buddhism kind of says otherwise, and so we have to take a look at that. And, what is the greed, anger, and foolishness going on today? And also through the studies, the Buddhist studies, I found out that the foolishness is the one that creates pestilence, which is right there with the pandemic, right? So we are not a very wise society. We're pretty intelligent, and we have all this knowledge, and we've made great advancements in medicine and science and technology, etc. But are we happy? We can't figure out happiness, right? We can't figure out, unity and respect for the other individual, even if there, of course, there's differences. We don't want to deny people differences. We want to celebrate people's differences, right? But, respect is the way to do that. We don't have to give up our own individuality. We don't have to give up our own culture, our own customs, or our own beliefs. But we do have to find a place where we can respect other people, you know? So getting back to the point of, you know, when we're in crises, am I the type of person that could really care enough about another person? You know, I'm happy right now. I am really not suffering. You know, this pandemic did not affect me. My husband and I have not been working for 2 years. My husband's been retired for over 10 years, you know, so we're not suffering financially. And, you know, the hardest thing I had to do was learn how to cook. You know? So, I mean, and that, you know, to some degree that was hard for me, but anyway, I get dinner on the table now between 5:30 and 6:30 every night, and that's, you know, that's the hardest thing I really had to do. But you know, you know, can I really be that kind of disciple that has this overwhelming desire to live in a society where there isn't, you know, this hatred, where there isn't this, you know, prejudice and racism and this, you know, division, etc., that causes so much problems for people and so much suffering for people is caused by that. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. No, of course.
Yeah, so what can I do, you know, as a practitioner of this Buddhism and a person that has that strong desire, what can I do? And I can use my Buddhist practice is what I can do. And we are praying collectively as members of the Soka Gakkai. We are praying every day extra, you know, for the to stop the spread of this virus, for one, but also for the health and the well-being of every other human being on this earth, you know. And I want to live in a society where we can collectively come up with answers of, you know, what is the cause of this virus? And even if we find the cause, then how do we treat it, et cetera, et cetera. But not only that, Buddhism says, well, we might know the cause and we might know the treatment, but here's where we fail. We fail because we cannot, you know, take the steps to disseminate the treatment or to get to all the people, etc. Because what interferes with that? The inequities, maybe. You know, there's certain neighborhoods, there's certain people even that are, you know, number 100 in line instead of number 1. So there's certain priorities in terms of, I don't know, treatments and getting masks and getting the right, you know, types of medicine, et cetera, out. And then profit intervenes, you know, people want to make a profit, politics intervenes. And so we're not able to take the necessary steps for, you know, viruses to be completely, you know, cured. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, yes, I found the fight in me, you know, to be that kind of person that wants to make that kind of difference. Mm-hmm. And Buddhism tells us that one is the mother of 10,000. So even one person can do a lot. And the youth division, again, they have this wonderful campaign going on of, you know, one person also and what one person can do. And so they have put that on. You can find it on Instagram. You can find it on the SGI podcasts, whatever platform you get your podcast from, they're on there. I might want to mention too, their award-winning podcasts. So, and so not only praying, you know, for this to happen, for this well-being to happen, and for to stop the spread of the virus, but also to pray for, you know, the opening up of our hearts and to really accept that we are all connected, which this virus shows us that we are. I mean, there isn't anybody on this earth right now that is not affected by this virus in one way or another. So to show that we're all connected, and the way out of this really is to recognize our humanity and build on that. You
Mm.
know, build on our humanity, that yes, I can be a person that accepts another person and could be, you know, someone that uplifts rather than tears down, you know. I can be a person of hope.
Mm.
I can be a person that, you know, is of good character and can what can I say? Can fight well. Can fight the ills in society.
Right. You know, and that's interesting, you know, these things that you say, you know, as I've been fortunate in the sense that I'm, you know, I'm the one that has this privilege of speaking with all these different individuals, right? Thus far, you know, I've spoken with imams and priests and pastors and reverends and, you know, leaders within the Sikh community and the Native American community. And it's so interesting to me how there's so many things uh, that ties us together, like you said, like our humanity, right? And it calls us to better the world that we live in. And you're absolutely right. In terms of this pandemic, you know, it has not that it has revealed, I think it's those things have already existed there, but it certainly has kind of, you know, put a spotlight on it, you know, the inequities that you're talking about, the good and the bad, right? The fact,
Yeah.
you know, there is a lot that we still need to work on. And it's interesting, like what you said, how this time to yourself, this time at home, where you're utilizing this time, you know, not necessarily being in a gathering or being amongst your other practitioners in the center and chanting together, but rather really you yourself by yourself, how it's really calling you to look within your own self and see, okay, what things can I do? And that's really something that, you know, all these various individuals that I've spoken to, that's really one thing that has come up more than once, is that I think, you know, for many of us, this is really a time that's allowing us to see, you know, well, how do I really connect to my faith, and what
Mhm.
power, you know, do I have to really make a difference in this world? And it's really, for me, it's really beautiful to see how people are kind of feeling like they're empowered to do that, right? And it took us to kind of um, distance ourselves from the world around us, in the sense that we're at home by ourselves, to really tap into that, and how that's one core thing that exists in all our faiths. You know, I wanted to ask you, Patti, I know, you know, for you, I know, you know, recently, you know, there was someone that was very close to you and they were going through the COVID, and what I was really fascinated by is, you know, I know I've known you for years. I know that you chant. I've chanted with you. I've, you know, been into the centers, but it's usually, you know, for a specific amount of time. But I remember you were saying, my goodness, you at one time you chanted for 4 hours straight. And, you know, for me, I just thought that was so profound. I was like, that's not a joke. So I would love to hear a little bit about that. You know, what was that experience, and what did you gain from that? And how did that help you in regards to, you know, kind of the specific challenge that you were going through that was a direct effect of this pandemic?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for asking. And it's not unusual actually for Buddhist members when they're facing a real crucial situation to chant for hours and hours and hours at one sitting, you know. I've known people that chant 10 hours a day, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, and until it breaks. But what I was faced with is my father contracted COVID-19, and he's 92 years old. So I was very worried. Of course, you know, the recovery rates for a person of his age are not good. And, you know, he, he is, he's not a sickly person, but he, you know, he could easily die. So I immediately, you know, went to work with my prayer, and then also you know, confided in my leaders and fellow members, which they all said, you know, I'll chant for your father too. And oh my gosh, my interfaith community too. There was such an outpouring of support. And I had people saying, I'll even chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, just tell me how to do it, how to say it, I'll do it with you, you know. It was so wonderful to have that, you know, community support. But yeah, I had to face, you know, that fear that, oh my gosh, my father could die. And, and then I got in touch with the part of me, which Buddhism talks about. One of the qualities of Buddhism, or I'm sorry, the Buddha, is courage, right? You gain courage and compassion and wisdom. Those are the three main qualities of the Buddha. So I got in touch with that courage, not after 4 hours. This is like day after day after day of 4 hours, and then finally, okay, I'm ready to fight. That was a time when my dad was really going downhill. He was not getting better, and it was very painful to hear even his voice on the phone. Of course, you can't see him, he's in quarantine and nobody can see him, et cetera, et cetera. So we're, my siblings and I are just calling him on the phone. That's all we could do, but he couldn't really even talk. And it became apparent that, I'm the one, even if there's other people, and of course the nurses and the doctors are doing everything. I'm not saying that he wasn't getting good care. He was absolutely fortunate enough to get all the care, the possible care that there was. And even a ventilator, should he need it, was available, all kinds of things like that. So, but I thought, spiritually, my dad does not practice this Buddhism. He's very much of a scientific mind. He was never religious, even though we grew up Catholic. He was never religious. He thought, after you die, you just come back as a beautiful tree, So he's not going to, tap into that part of him. And I know from my Buddhist practice that not only my prayer will affect my life, but it will affect other people's lives. That is the connection that we have. And the guidance from my leaders, further reinforced that. They said, Patti, you can repay through your Buddhist practice, you can repay the debts of gratitude to your father. No matter what happens to him, you will have no regrets, because if you use this prayer, you will be doing that type of cause that you can make at this time. That's how crucial of a moment this is. And so I thought, yeah, I absolutely have a lot of gratitude for my father, not only this lifetime, but probably many other lifetimes, that I've been together in one way with my father. I really believe that. So I thought, yes, I'm going to repay my debt of gratitude, and I remembered that my father at age 90 at the family reunion, his birthday party, he stood up and he said, thank you very much for being here. He said, let's all meet again in 10 years when I turn 100. And I thought, oh my gosh, Yeah, I thought, oh, I really want to support my dad in that life affirming declaration, And he carved out a life for himself. Even after the divorce from my mother, he became this Renaissance man, I called him. He rebuilt his life, and he came out of depression, and he was climbing mountains. And my sister and brothers and I looked at each other, who is this person, And, and then, he lost his second wife to Alzheimer's 5 years ago. And it took a while, but he climbed out of that depression too. And, he's living in a senior center. And, he's not like this kind of real outgoing person, but somehow all the people know him there. And there's 300 residents, and they all know him. Oh, Roy, come sit with us, and, Roy, what happened? Did you work out that puzzle that you were working on? And when they instituted the Resident of the Month program, he was the first person to get it.
Oh my goodness, wow.
Yeah, that's my dad. Anyway, through my prayer, I was getting in touch with all of these things, and I thought, Dad, I love you, I'm fighting. At this time, I'm fighting for his life. And also there's, this beautiful story in the Lotus Sutra about the Dragon King's daughter. And again, women were not gaining enlightenment. They just did not have, in the provisional teachings, they did not have the capacity to gain enlightenment, and neither did animals. So here comes this Dragon King's daughter, both a female and an animal. And she's 8 years old, and the Dragon King is her father, right? And she has this tremendous relationship with her father. So I was encouraged to be the Dragon King's daughter, Patti. And the Dragon King's daughter became enlightened.
Mm.
And she just said, you know, watch me become enlightened, you know. And she did it like that because of her pure heart, because of her, you know, faith and her connection with her father. And so because she became enlightened, then her father had the open door to become enlightened.
Mm.
You know? So I thought, okay. So all of these things were on my mind. And, you know, then my father started getting better and better and better. And oh my gosh, you know, he tested finally after like 3.5 weeks, he tested negative. So he beat COVID-19. And that was such a reward for me. It was such a feeling of like, yes, a breakthrough in faith. And I was able to encourage other people, you know, because of course, you know, in our Buddhist community, of course, loved ones and even members have contracted it. There have been some deaths. But, you know, you learn you can use your own life. You can use your own experiences in your own life, you know, to encourage other people.
Right. And I think, you know, thank you for sharing this. And the reason you know, the same thing, we've had friends whose elderly parents, same thing in the 90s, they're, you know, they're still fighting it, you know, things like that. And I remember when your father was first not doing that well, and we had our little WhatsApp group on our for our board members, then our faith board members. And I can see, and I think, you know, obviously we've been in touch also, we see each other through Zoom for various programs. And I remember hearing your voice just even, you know, right in the beginning when your father was not doing so well. And then I remember you were telling us about your chanting and what you were doing, and other people were chanting with you. And I remember our board member said, you know, let us chant with you too. Tell us how we can. And, you know, none of us were Buddhist, right? You know, we're Muslims and Hindu, and we were all saying the same thing. And then I remember when I got an update that, oh, he's doing better. And then I think it was a program that we were both a part of, something like that. But I distinctly even remember how the tone in your voice was so different, right? Because you felt, you know, and to me, I thought about that, and I was like, you know, that's what faith is, right? And I think, you know, of all the people that I have had the honor and the privilege of talking to about faith and this pandemic, I think, you know, for sure, you know, you had the most personal experience, right? Where, you know, certainly we're all dealing with it as a community, the ramifications of this pandemic, but to have such a dear, close loved one go through it, and the utilization of your faith and how it, you know, it played a part in turning that around. And I, you know, and to me, that was just really profound and beautiful. And, you know, and I learned a great deal, and I hope that all of us can learn a great deal about that, you know, tapping into what that means to be who we are as faithful people, even though we're not physically in the same proximity, you know. And for your father, like you were saying, you know, he doesn't even embody the same faith tradition. How the significance of our prayer, right? And that's such a beautiful thing. And so it was just a shining example for me. And I found myself sharing that story more than once with other people, because I thought it was just such a beautiful example of what, you know, people using, really finding hope, you know, through their faith amidst this pandemic, in whatever effect that it's, you know, it's affecting them. I know we're almost out of time, Patti, but I want to, you know, two things I wanted to ask. I know you had mentioned that other people can, you know, kind of join you guys when in the chanting that you may do. And so at the end of these videos, we usually have kind of like an informational slide. So if there are people who are interested in, you know, participating in this type of a chanting, can they contact you? Can we share your information on that? And would that be okay to do that?
Yes, that's absolutely okay, Milia. Thank you. And if I could also ask that maybe you could share those, the information link of how they could connect with the podcasts that are being put out now by our youth division, and specifically about COVID-19 and anxiety and things like that.
Absolutely, we'll be sure to do that. So as we conclude, Patti, one of the things I always ask, you know, my friends that I'm kind of interviewing is, you told me about this beautiful story about, you know, the dragon princess, and, you know, the effect of what she did. I wonder, is there another story within, your faith tradition that you would like to share with us as we conclude today, that can kind of provide a sense of hope and inspiration, for us all as we collectively, live through this COVID era as people of faith and people of faith as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there are many other people's, experiences too. I want to bring up, it's the nurses division, if I can. This was formed by our current president, Daisaku Ikeda, in 1969, recognizing that, they are the ones that bring comfort and hope to sick people, and they often do it like round the clock, tirelessly. And so there is something called the nurses division, and that is, the division is devoted to encouraging those people in the work that they do. And my co-leader in faith in this Long Beach where I live and practice, his name is June, and he recently became certified as a nurse's assistant. And he got a job earlier this year, working at Torrance Memorial, which was a great place to work. And at that time, the pandemic had not actually started, and he was started as, in training as an intern. And they told him, well, this is going to be your department. Once you finish your training, you're going to be working in this XYZ department. He said, okay. Well, then after he finished his training of 6 weeks, the XYZ department became the COVID-19 department.
Wow.
Because they had that many patients there at that time for COVID-19. So all of a sudden, June is in the midst of, starting his career of this, ward department full of COVID-19 patients, and he told me that he relied on these, these principles set forth, like which are, the qualities or the motto, I should say, of like the, nurses division. And that is really like to pray for and work for the health and well-being of all the patients, no matter what. And kind of in the spirit of, if you've ever heard of Florence Nightingale.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. So she brought the, holistic picture to healthcare, right? Including like even opening up the blinds in a certain way at a certain time to bring in the sunshine, what color paint on the wall, what is the spirit, in other words, of that patient. Just recognizing that the doctors and the nurses do wonderful work medicine-wise, and that's very important. But, the condition of the patient has to take it in, right? So like every day, this is the story. He embodies the story of the Bodhisattva of the earth. And Bodhisattvas of the earth made a vow. And there's this tremendous story also in the Lotus Sutra. I won't go into all the details, but basically they emerged from the earth when the question was asked, who will carry on, the sake of the Buddha, the Buddhist teachings, who will carry out, the Buddhist teachings to overcome the suffering of all people? Will it be, this group of people who are like the intellectuals? And no, it won't be. Will it be this type of group of people that have been, experienced and studied? No, it's not going to be that group. Who is it going to be? It's going to be the Bodhisattvas of the earth. and we all emerged as just like normal people. We are the essential workers in your grocery stores and, and your Uber drivers. We are like, nurses assistants and sometimes we're nurses and doctors and lawyers and whatever, but we are just ordinary people. We weren't not born as Bodhisattvas of the earth. The way we became Bodhisattvas of the earth is we made a vow. we made a vow to care for other people's suffering and lead them to happiness. So basically, we made this vow to live selfless lives, right, for the sake of others. And so so every day, getting back to June, that's what he kind of like, that's his approach to work, and it's like so much more than anything that I approach. I approach doing something that I call work. Usually I don't approach it that way, right? I just approach, I hope this is going to be good enough for the boss, or I hope I can make the deadline, or something like that. But this is like, thinking of the people involved, and thinking of the well-being of society, thinking outside of yourself for the sake of others. And so that's another story. Anybody can be a bodhisattva of the earth. You don't have to be Buddhist either. Just kind of have to make that vow. So the interactions, even if you're at a store with a lot of angry people and they're yelling at the store clerk, and mask wearing, not mask wearing is being fought over, and all of this stuff, you can shine a light. And that, because of your inner light, that will be reflected in your environment, so you can make a difference.
That's
and be a bodhisattva of the earth.
So we all have the capacity within ourselves to be this bodhisattva, to live a life where we are living really for the others and the enlightenment and the betterment of others. And that is,
yes.
that is beautiful. And that's a
Yes.
beautiful way to end this time with you. And thank you so much, Patti, for taking the time and for sharing about your faith and your personal experiences. And I really appreciate it. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Milia. Thank you so much.
Always. And we want to thank all of you for joining us every week as well, and trying to find hope through our faiths. I want to ask you to or invite you again for next Monday, when we'll have another session. Our next one, I believe, will be with Edina Lekovic, and we will be talking about the pandemic and its effects on Muslims, particularly going through Ramadan and the Eid celebration and things like that. So we'll have more information about that. We also want to please ask you to like our Facebook page and to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you'll have all of these videos of the various programs that we do. So until next time, we thank you so much for being with us, and we hope to see you again next week, as we all really try to find the silver lining and find hope through our faith during this time of the pandemic. So thank you so much, and have a good day, and we'll see you next week. Take care.